everyone, it's Kelly with Women for One and Your Messy Brilliance podcast. So excited this gorgeous day in May 2018 in Seattle to have an incredible woman that is so aligned with our work at Women for One, Jaime Fleres, on this show today. So welcome, Jaime. I'm really excited to have you.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. I'm so excited to be here.
So I want to tell our community a little bit about you before we dive into your story, because that's what we do at Women for One, first and foremost. And it's what you do. So that's why I'm so excited to talk to you. So you guys, Jaime Fleres, she's a champion for women's embodied, authentic, and creative expression. As a former professor, an author, a speaker, a healer, like we all have all these hats, and a writing coach, Jaime helps creative souls use writing as a tool of expression and transformation, either by writing books or through personal therapeutic storytelling. Jaime's the author of the incredible book, Birth Your Story, Why Writing About Your Birth Matters, which I have right in front of me here, which explores the value and how-to of using writing to remember, process, heal, and honor our experiences of giving birth. I cannot wait to talk to you about that. And she can be found online at jaimefleres.com, and we will talk about that at the end. But welcome. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Yeah. So how about you just dive into your story? Because really, we both we met in Asheville at my book tour this year, which was really exciting to meet you and feel your energy in the audience. And we have some mutual colleagues as well. Tell people your story of how you've gotten to the place now of supporting people, mostly women. Talk about their stories and learn from them and dive into them in a therapeutic and healing way.
Sure. Well, like most of us, we come to our sacred work through, a series of trials or a series of experiences, right? Sometimes it's great contrast. And so for me, I had the experience of really living the first half of my life in silence. I experienced a lot of abuse growing up from various places, and just a lot of situations where I didn't speak my truth. I didn't speak up. I didn't say what was happening. I didn't say how I felt. I just really stayed silent. And so I watched the effect of that on my life, throughout my youth and growing up. And then but the thing that really sustained me during those rougher times growing up was that I wrote. I found writing at 13, and I always say like it saved my life because I would go to writing, to write. I would write poetry or journal, and I would go to express what was true. Like that was the place where I really could speak my truth, and it felt safe, and it felt like a place where I could really explore the mess and make sense of it, and just sit with it and witness it, and also work to heal it. And so I've used writing as an ally for myself for my whole life. Since I was 13. And, I went to school, I got my degree in women's studies and English. And so I've always been interested in women's empowerment, women's experiences of life. And then I went on and got my master's in writing. And so I've been a professional writer for a long time. And I've also, taught professionally or at the university as a professor. And then I really wanted to get back into working with people one-on-one. So not only in the professional writing capacity, but really working with people on writing the stories that matter and using writing as a tool to express our truth and then to transform, use it as a transformational tool.
That's awesome. And it's very aligned. We're preaching to the choir to each other today. But that's why I think we can really dive into the value of this. And where I really want to start, and we're going to talk about your book in a little bit, but I want to read an excerpt from this, the beginning of chapter 16, because it precludes, that's the word. It precludes what I want to talk about. And I love, obviously, the way you write. And so chapter 16 starts writing about trauma. And you said there's a particular method of writing that researchers and writers have found to be most instrumental to healing trauma. And then you go on to talk about the professor that did an experiment. And in one of his studies, they split the study population into 3 groups. They all wrote about a traumatic experience, but the first wrote only about what happened. The second only vented about how they felt. And third wrote about what happened and how they felt about it then and now. This study showed a significant increase in physiological, I love that, and psychological well-being only in the third group. And then you say, to use writing as an agent of healing, one needs to talk about what happened, how they felt about it at the time, and how they feel about it now. I really want to dive into that because, first of all, that's what Women for One is about right there. It's like how it impacts you now, right? What happened in the past, not just storytelling, but diving into the experience to gain the wisdom, and the lessons to learn to move forward in life. So how do you suggest people move into their stories as a way of healing their wounds?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've come into writing in a lot of different places. And so in this particular book, I'm talking about birth, but I also feel like it's such a metaphor for like the major transformative experiences in our lives. And so when things are traumatic, a lot of it is, it takes a lot of courage actually to get to the page to express what's true. I think, and I talk about it in another part in the book where we have this impulse, I think, in something inside of us that says like, don't look at the hard stuff. It's hard to look at. It's messy. Will we be overwhelmed by feeling? What will happen? And actually what research has shown is that it takes more energy and physiological stress to suppress our truths rather than actually expressing them. So it also takes a little bit of a leap of faith, though, to come to the page and say, okay, I'm willing to try this, I'm willing to give it a shot and express what's really true. So I think, to really write about trauma and to dig into it, writing has to be a safe place. So it has to be a place where that you can go without there's no critic there, there's no audience that's going to receive your story and say whether you did it right or not, or, you took too long in this part or not long enough here. You really need to be able to write for yourself first. I think that's really important. And then I think it's also important, just like the passage you wrote, it's like you really, you want to not only say what happened, but you want to really explore your inner landscape. So like what is going on inside of you as this story unfolds and what's alive for you now around the story.
I love that. What's alive for you now? Getting curious about what's alive for you now.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great. I mean, I didn't think we were going to dive into your book that quickly, but let's explore
Sure.
your book a little because of course I'm a mom, you're a mom, and we did the birthing thing. I did it 3 times. Mm-hmm. And in reading your book, it made me realize how each birth reflected where I was in some other ways in my life. Right. And I have different flavors of each. Really reflecting, writing about them, thinking, and reflecting back to what my experience was. So how can women heal themselves through writing their birth stories?
Yeah, I mean, writing helps us do so many things. I mean, it helps us remember. And so especially, going back just for a minute to the trauma piece, a lot of people who have trauma don't have a clear narrative in their head about what happened. They tend to have moments that are really charged in their experience, but they haven't had an opportunity to really process and really make sense of what happened. So writing really helps you create a narrative. It helps, we're storytelling creatures as humans. And so we naturally want to get the story. And when we're able to create a narrative out of our experience and fill in some of the gaps and make some sense of what happened, that can be healing in and of itself. So writing really helps us process. It also helps us remember. So it helps us, really kind of anchor in our experience and remember. It helps mark a point in time too. Like, this is what I'm thinking about this story and how I'm telling the story in this moment, and we can look back on that as it changes. It also, So, I mean, I can keep going.
No, I guess I would like to relate because we're back on trauma, which I'm just going to follow the energy of the conversation. There's a place in me that I have been acknowledging these days, and it's about the fact that one of my defense mechanisms growing up when I had trauma occur is I made a choice to forget. And so having and reclaiming those pieces of my memory over the years has been very challenging for me. And have you found that with a lot of women? Because sometimes I'm like, am I creating this narrative? Did it really happen? Like there is this place with trauma sometimes where we choose to forget, and we have to be almost an investigative reporter to go in and dive into the feelings, and the experiences of what occurred.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's value in how we're telling the story. I mean, it is always, especially with trauma, sometimes our memory can be a little distorted, but what matters is how we're actually, how we're storying it, how we're telling the story to ourselves now. And so part of what's cool about writing, I heard you say reclamation, and it absolutely does help us reclaim. We may not be in charge of what happened to us, but we get to tell the story. And that's the place where we really have ownership. And so we get to work out the story, and we get to, create. What's cool about writing is that we get to create a witness. So we get to write it, put it out there, and then look at it and start interfacing with it, Really, you start noticing, you start discovering like, oh, that's what I was thinking about that, or that's what I said that meant about who I am, or you just start to really discover through the process of writing what's really happening inside of you. And so you can start to move things and shift your relationship to the experience that you had.
Right. And I like that personal experience. Yet, for me and for many people I know that have experienced any kind of trauma, when I've reclaimed my experiences, and like you said, we get to write our own narrative. There are people that experienced something completely different that were in our lives at that time. And I've had a big experience of people being really upset with me for sharing my truth in my story. And on my site, I've had people say, can you take my name off? I've upset a lot of people, my family, my friends, who it was no way in blame, or there was no disparaging of other people, but just the reality of other people was so different than our narratives. How do you think we kind of reconcile that for us so that we can stand strong in our truth? This is something I've always wanted to talk to someone about. So
yeah, totally.
Dive in.
Well, I think the first person we need to give validation to is ourselves. It's like, can we say, can we interface with ourselves and say, this is my truth and I'm willing to stand in that. Yep. And I recognize that other people may not have had that experience or feel like they can relate to what was happening inside of me, but that doesn't negate my experience. And so I think it really takes that courage to stand in our truth and to say, yeah, that this is mine, And I think when it comes to writing too, what's really helpful is to give people, there's always that concern, right, when it comes to audience. And I work with clients in writing all the time, and they're like, well, what if my so-and-so read that, or what am I going to do? And I always say, write your stories for yourself first, so that you can come out completely uncensored and you can speak your truth without ever having to worry about a filter. And then you can worry later on, not even worry, but you can, put on that lens and say, okay, now.
Choice. Yeah, you can make an effective choice and discernment, right? Use your discernment.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So there's always, but the first thing, like that core, that foundation is, can I speak the truth to myself? And am I willing to really honor that? And am I really willing to honor myself?
But yes, and I love and I agree with everything you're saying, and I needed that reinforced for me. There is this notion you become very vulnerable, and I know, I felt like I allowed my little girl to speak her truth, and me as like the mother of my little girl, speaking of birthing your story, right? The mother of my little girl, I feel very protective of her when she is attacked for standing in her truth, right? So I think we also need to be very careful. Like, I've been in therapy where someone's like, well, my therapist is like, this is your little girl, so you need to stand in your truth, but also be protective of the courage that it took your little inner child to say some of this, if it was traumatic when you were younger, at least, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I love that you're bringing up like the inner work of like parenting our own parts of ourselves so that we can take care of ourselves as we step bravely into this vulnerable space of speaking the truth, because we're not always met with like applause, right? When we speak our truth, unfortunately, So it takes great courage, and it does come with that great vulnerability. And, kind of even touching back into the book, I talk about, sharing your birth stories. And I do have a caveat in there, and a lot of it is from Brene Brown's work, some of what I referenced there, but it's really like we get to decide who we share our stories with. And some people need to earn the right to hear our stories, like in some contexts,
Yes, my therapist says, don't cast pearls before swine. Have some discernment, you really have to be conscious of who you're making a choice to share with. And, for people in the public, you have to have a real strong constitution, and very good boundaries around what you will take in as judgment, and, stand strong in your truth when you're putting it out there to the world, right? On the internet, for sure.
Absolutely.
And be careful with that, because you can abandon yourself if you're not ready, I believe. I tell women that on our site all the time. That's why we have the option for women to share anonymously, because sometimes it's not even like they're not ready. It's just that's not where they are right now. I don't like to say they're not ready. It's like that's just not where they are. And they might never be there, but they've still done the inner work by doing the story, writing it. and gain the lessons they've needed, for that. So, so I wanted to ask you, we're experiencing this like new revolution, right? I don't have to tell you about it with Me Too. And, they're claiming they're often unspoken stories, right, about our experiences, and that can range from like really invisible emotional labor we do to the legacy of the Me Too movement. Really, it's like a big range. How do you see this transforming us as individuals, but more importantly, as well as our larger society? I really like to ask that question of women that are doing the personal work with other women. How is this shifting our society?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're moving what was once so silenced and marginalized about our experience into the light. And I think when we do that and we start having more of our truths, our collective truths represented in society, then things start to naturally shift. We start to become more aware collectively of what's actually happening. I feel like there were a few decades there, a few generations that, the deal was we stay silent. We don't talk about those things. And I think we're really experiencing this reclamation of our voices here on a collective for men and for women, but particularly for women. And I mean, I think it's complex territory. And really, I mean, I'm a huge advocate like you are of us speaking our truths, and really standing in the truth of our stories and knowing that our stories matter. So, do I have like a great sweeping thing about our collective and where this is going? I might, but I do think it's really important that more of us are doing this, and it's new territory for us, especially on the collective. When we start to share out into the collective, but it's important work, and so I'm very curious where it's headed as well. I'm very hopeful that we get to a more empowered space for all of us.
Right. I love that. I agree too. And so as we're coming into now, like we've referenced your book a lot already, but I do want to talk about your book and about the whole birth your story and really dive into what made you what was the aha that made you want to write, and I've read it in the book, but like that made you want to write about the birthing process and how that can help us as women understand our story more.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, and as we've spoken of, I'm a champion of women telling the truth about their lives. And so for me, this natural place to go first was birth, because not that all women birth, although we do give birth to creations, all of us do in some form or shape. But birth specifically because it is such a transformational, potent rite of passage that many women do experience. And it holds a lot for us, even like you said, your births were reflections of your life in some way and through each of your birth experiences. And so birth to me is a real macrocosm of our lives. It's a really potent place for us to explore, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a mother? What does it mean to experience pain and the most magnificent love we've ever had? How do we hold all of that as women, and then how do we make sense of it and tell those stories?
Yeah. And what I loved in it too is you wrote your birth story, and what it felt like to me is like when I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, where would I ever start writing my birth story? So to have your example in there was so helpful. I mean, not that it wasn't a template for what I would write, but it gave me permission, right, to go, oh, it's messy, and this is how I felt. And you broke it into the different phases. And I love that. And the other thing I really love about your book is you have very simple journaling exercises, which, as you know, with my book, I try to keep it very simple. So some of them aren't this long, drawn out things. It's like lists or, what's the beginning of your story? I mean, I love how simple. Where did you come up with the simple ideas in this book? Because I love, what was the impetus to doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted it to be simple. I mean, I've worked with, I've also worked with women in the childbearing season, and, whether you're writing your story, soon after you gave birth or not, simplicity has this beautiful design to it. There's something great about simplicity. And so, and it can be a complicated experience of writing our stories, especially really charged stories. And so, there are simple ways in, and I think that's part of the beauty of the book too, is that it just really gives people really an easy access point for writing.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things you say, where does your story begin? I read this and I go, oh, I don't know.
Right?
But so they're very, what's the word? Esoteric as well as,
right.
as practical and simple, all rolled into one. I'm like, wow, I could write on that because I talk to a lot of women and they're like, I don't have any stories to share. Seriously. I just talked to a woman yesterday. I've heard that since I started Women for One. And then yesterday I was talking to this, who was it? It was this beautiful woman who's just so interesting and so fascinating. And she said, oh, I was just like one of those meet and greets. She reached out to me because she teaches people, she heals people, right? And she said, I just didn't think I had a story to share until you asked me to become a truth teller. And I'm like, wow. So it's really the frame in the mind, the framework around how we look at story, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And do we have a story to tell? Like, does my voice matter? I mean, I think there's a bigger thing underneath that. And I don't think as women, we're really socialized to feel that. I mean, you're doing such great work with this. And I think my book is a piece of that body of work right now too, which is like to really, I think it's first for us to know that we have a story, and that's part of the work of my book too, is a lot of women don't get the opportunity to really explore their birth stories with the fullness that they really deserve. And so part of it is just like making that simple argument of like, you have an important story to tell, you have a story that matters, especially to you and your child, if not, many more people around you,
Yes, absolutely. And then this notion of embodiment, I noticed in your book, which I think we even touched on when we were together in Asheville, at my book signing. I really love that you're aligned with embodying things. So I wanted to talk to you about embodying experiences and how you define that, especially with storytelling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, embodiment has been a huge piece of my own journey through life. I've been a practitioner and a teacher of a practice called Koya, which is an embodied movement practice for women. And so that practice for me has really been an opportunity to experience story in my body, actually, through dance and through movement, through movement that feels really true to me. And how do I tell stories with this body? And so I think, my own journey, just given kind of the trajectory of my life, is that I kind of evacuated my body in a lot of situations, and wasn't an embodied storyteller, whether, even if I was a storyteller in those moments, like I just wasn't in my body. And so I think part of my journey to heal and come back has been like, can I have these grounded embodied experiences, and can I tell stories that honor the body, and that feel really embodied. And so I just think it's really important for us. And, as women, I mean, we have such interesting and complex relationships with our bodies, and so it's a great place there's a lot there to dive into,
Yeah, definitely. And in your book, in the back, it has a Koya-based movement ritual. And I love that because it connects you back with the energy of your birth experience, which how amazing is that? And then you also have, I mean, this book, and I don't really just say this usually. I'm like, this book is so like rich for anyone that's been a mother. So it's, perfect Mother's Day is coming up. But for anybody that has been a mother, is becoming a mother, like the birth story guide, which takes you through the phases, right? Where you can write and then that puts your story together. And I haven't done it yet, but I really like to walk through this for all three of my children because each one of them was so, so different. And I have these little patches of memory, but it'd be nice to, like I've talked about before, reclaim all of them into a story about each. And also, what a gift to a child to be able to write about that, right?
Yeah, because if we think about like what we know about our own births, we all have a varying degree of how much of our story we've heard, what kind of, what is the quality of that story, how do we feel about it? But we all want to know. I mean, birth is like the personal equivalent of the creation story that like all cultures through all times have attempted to express, and so it matters. It matters to us like how we were born. And so even to, women who've given, who had birth by cesarean, I say like, you have a story, like that's how your child came into the world. It matters just as much as any other birth story,
Yeah. I mean, I think about my story. All my mom told me was she didn't drink the whole pregnancy and then she had 4 martinis right before I came out because, she was in pain and the doctor told her to go have 4 martinis. I mean, really, like I was born in 1968, and you think about that. That's pretty much all I know about my birth. I mean, that's pretty sad.
Yeah. Right? Because there had to have been more to it than that.
a little bit, just a little
Probably.
bit. But
there's some other things.
But really, I have in the birthing of the 3 children, I have like labels for each of them, generalities. But to go into specifics, you could find so much more rich experience from it, right?
And nuance. Yeah, we tend to kind of shorthand our experiences, right? Like that one was great, or that was hard, or that was, and then we get into it. And that's part of a healing narrative too, is really that balance of like, some of it was amazing and some of it was really intense and some of it was traumatizing and some of it was beautiful. It's more wholeness.
It's
in
messy.
Our story.
It's a messy experience, right? Just like life. So it mirrors life.
It really
does. That's why I love Birth Your Story, because here I am asking women to birth their story on my site. You're doing it literally and also like I'm doing it metaphorically. So I just honor what you're doing, and I thank you so much for being here. How can we, what is the work you're doing with women right now? How can my community get in touch with you?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm still getting the word out about this book, and it's continuing to grow in other circles and being found. So that's really wonderful. I also work with women. I have a 3-month program where I really work with women on helping them birth the stories of their lives. So really for personal processing and personal transformation, using writing as a way to heal. And so I do that work. And then I also help creative, soulful, amazing women write books. So I do the two of those things. And the best way to reach me is through my website, which is jaimefleres.com.
Wonderful. And I was just so honored to meet you. I love Asheville. You're not from there originally, I know. You're from, the West Coast, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
But you're in Asheville. I'm a native North Carolinian, so it was cool to be there. And it's just, I hope we can stay in touch. And I really encourage everyone in our community to get the book, and we'll have it up, and we'll have an image of it up, Birth Your Story, Why Writing About Your Birth Matters, and connect with Jaime on her site. So thank you again, Jaime. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Oh, thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Yep. Bye, everyone.